Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm here with our host, Peter Scalzo, and our executive producer, Jack McKay, who is really responsible for the content that comes on this podcast.
Responsible.
So just want to make that
we
clear.
We threatened Jack to say that.
So, yeah. So,
anyway,
I just think that you have to give credit where credit's due. And so today we're going to continue a conversation.
Yeah.
Because we've been talking about miracles, and you are a walking, living miracle. And so this is a really fascinating, area to think about. And I think anybody who has had a major illness, there's a question about healing that I think crosses that your mind. And
in the past 20 years, the spectrum of Christians that I've spoken with, I mean, I don't want to say what denominations, but from very liturgical kinds of tradition practices all the way to Pentecostal and all the gamut in between, and just dealing with individuals on their view of healing, especially their scriptural view of healing.
Can you just dealing with people on the spectrum?
On the spectrum, on the evangelical spectrum, the religious spectrum, whatever it would be.
I don't want to be responsible for the content anymore.
Jack's not responsible.
Jack is saying he does not want to be responsible for content, because I actually have a correction here, because most evangelicals are not liturgical. So
okay, hey, let's just start it over. We should. Let's just start it over. I'm going to leave all that out. Okay. Sean, start us out again.
I like the way we had this going.
Oh, well, start us out again. I'm going to leave out the liturgical thing.
You hear that? He doesn't want to be corrected on...
no, I think you're right. And I'm like, yeah, that was a dumb thing to say. I'm not going to say it like that.
You think of evangelicalism as this really broad thing?
It's not really. It is.
All right, here we go.
Yeah.
Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I am something here. You're the facilitator.
You're the facilitator.
Yeah, and I'm here with our host, Peter Scalzo. And I do want to reach out and say, hey, Jack, as our executive producer, one who's responsible for the content of the program, I just want to make sure that you get your due credit here, brother. And
he doesn't want to take responsibility for any of it. That's why he hasn't been on yet.
So we're going to talk today. We're going to continue. We've been talking about miracles and healing and just the importance of that. And I just had the thought that anybody who has had a major illness or disease that, like cancer, has thought about this, and you yourself have experienced this. And so it's been of interest because you've had a lot of interactions across a broad spectrum of believers or people of religious background. And so tell us some of it, and we'll talk about today's healing.
So people of faith,
and
especially the Christian faith. That's really what we're referring to, and those individuals who study the life of Jesus and the New Testament, and when healing happened in Scripture, what do they take from it as part of their healing stew? That Sean Stewart gave us that concept, that metaphor, whatever it is.
This is call out day, isn't it?
Yeah, it's call out day. Anyway, but it was good because I think of a person preparing a stew and they're putting in this ingredient, the other ingredient. And we were talking about what ingredients are required for your healing stew. And I think Christians will look at Scripture and pull out certain scriptures and say, see, this has to be in the stew and this other thing has to be in the stew. And I've had 20 years of talking to people of faith about healing. And I've gone into situations in hospital rooms or prayer circles or whatever it is, and heard expressions of faith based on what their healing stew is. And so I find it interesting when we actually go to the scene level of Jesus healing and exactly what was going on with him when he healed.
This might be a better analogy than I even imagined, because
the healing stew.
Yeah, I'll give you the
take credit for it.
Well, I guess you can. You're the host,
I
right?
didn't come up with it.
But have you gone and had stew with somebody else from their recipe?
Yeah.
Meaning that whatever stew looked like in your family.
Yeah.
Because you throw a bunch of stuff into a pot, and and usually there's vegetables, maybe in some beef or some kind of meat product. Maybe it's not beef even. And you have something and it gets set in front of me and it's called stew. But I have a sense that there's almost no family stew that's the same. Because I've had stew at somebody else, where they would call, beef stew or something. And it's like, well, it doesn't have this in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're talking about with miracles. Like what we're finding is that there are so many varieties or examples of what's in healing. But if you came from a tradition or a family who had a belief about what stew looked like, or what it's only stew if it has that set of ingredients. And I think what we're exploring is that, well, it doesn't actually work that way. It's not, your family story isn't exactly a prescription as to what meets healing or the healing stew. Right. It's quite a bit more varied than that. But I don't think a lot of people treat it that way, right? I think it's easy to get stuck in our own worldview related to this.
Yeah, and it's fun to go back to, and I did say the word fun, to go back to and see how Jesus healed, and maybe the why, and what happened, and all that stuff besides the how.
Yeah, so today's story, we're going to talk about some missing ingredients, what is not in the stew, because we're gonna open up about a man who was born blind.
John chapter 9.
John chapter 9. And so this story, do you want me to read it? Just the opening part of it a little bit?
Yeah, why don't you, right?
All right, because this part here might be of at least some level of interest. It says, as he passed by, and he being Jesus, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Which is just hilarious. That, hey, a guy that was born blind, his sin is what's responsible. Jesus answered, it was not that the man sinned or his parents, but the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who was sent while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am the world, I am the light of the world. And so we could just take that opening piece there. What we see is that Jesus passes by somebody, and we don't see any example of this man saying, hey, I'm blind, can you heal me?
Right.
It's no interaction at all from him.
Right.
And later in this passage, what we'll find is that when he's asked by the authorities who did this, he can't tell them, because he was like, I don't know. I think he was a prophet.
Right. So he doesn't really know or understand.
Yes.
Who Jesus is.
He doesn't have a belief that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, who has this great power.
Right.
He doesn't cry out to him begging for healing or asking for healing.
Yep.
It's just Jesus is walking.
He does. The interesting thing is, when Jesus spreads mud on his eyes, right? That's this healing. This is the method. He does go to which pool? He has to go to the pool and wash it off, right?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and...
So he does obey that piece of it.
Yeah, so here's that part of the passage. So having said these things, he spit on the ground, he being Jesus, and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud, and he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. So this is the actual miracle side of things. And so there is something that you would put in, and there's things that are not part of the stew today, or the healing stew.
Yeah.
One wasn't a belief that Jesus was God. One wasn't an ask to be healed. But there was an ask on Jesus's part for obedience to do something, which is interesting that is the request from Jesus. Does that speak to you in any way related to this?
Yeah, because it does. I think that my understanding of the miracles, when Jesus exercised healing miracles, is that Jesus is interested in developing faith in that person. In other words, he wants them to walk away with a heart change, or he wants their lives to be impacted, not just physically, but you could tell spiritually. And it's interesting because this man had to exercise somewhat of faith here. He had to get up and go to the pool of Siloam. I mean, if he just sat and wiped the mud off his face, that's not exercising faith, right? So he had to somewhat exercise some faith and do what Jesus said, even though he didn't understand who Jesus was according to the text.
So faith and obedience, there's action required in this case. And so that's an interesting thing. That there's action required, and that action is an action of faith, meaning it is a willingness to believe enough to go through this. And you see in the Old Testament, there's a great story of someone who had leprosy.
Yeah.
And he came to the king of Israel to be healed. And the king of Israel, I have no ability to heal you. And Elisha hears about it and says, send him my way. Mm-hmm. And so Elisha sends out his servant and tells the guy, hey, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River and you'll be healed. Mm-hmm. And this person came from a foreign land and very prideful. And he was like, hey, aren't there, many rivers that are much greater than the rivers of Israel? Why would I do that? And he's angry and he storms away. Mm-hmm. And so that,
didn't the servant say something like, this is really not that much of a request. Why don't you at least try it? This is a man of God who asked you to do it.
Yep. And so once he gets over his hissy fit about what the ask was, he goes and washes in the river 7 times and he's healed.
Yeah.
And so we see that there's a parallel here between Elisha's ask and what Jesus's ask was. Mm-hmm. And there was an ask of obedience. And I think maybe an ask of humility.
Mm-hmm, for
sure. We want to call it that. So that's why I like to bring that other story in, is it really shows that there is an ask of humility. Obedience by itself shows humility. Yeah. It's like when we are saying, hey, I can't do this, and somebody's given me of greater authority, of power, has given me something that I've been called to do. Mm-hmm. He walked in humility and obedience. They go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this John chapter 9 story, this was on the Sabbath, correct?
Yes.
And does after he experiences the healing and he's able to see, just go over that. Is there an interaction at that point between the man and Jesus?
Well, I'll go. We'll start with what happened there. There's a reason why.
Yeah.
So, they basically right after that, there was a interaction with the Pharisees. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Mm-hmm. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened the eyes. So that's the issue that's being raised here. Mm-hmm. So the Pharisees again asked him how he'd received his sight. And he said to them, he put mud on my eyes and I washed and I see. Some of the Pharisees said, the man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes? And he said, he is a prophet. Mm. So you see the interaction. There's a point to this miracle, so that it has significance. And you highlighted that a second ago. It's like one of the things to recognize about Jesus's miracles, at least in the healing, was that it had a point of revealing who Jesus was, of his power, his authority. And you can see that the religious leaders of the day are debating it, because how do you overcome the fact that somebody has supernatural powers? And so they go on a mission to prove whether that's true or not. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really fascinating thing. And I think it might be worth exploring that for your own journey too, is that I've thought for some time, I think you have too, but there's a point to your healing. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't to hide it, but to share your journey in some manner, that we do Cancer in Peace. You've opened your life as a book on the backside, and maybe through the midst of this journey. I think you feel like that you were asked to do that even. Mm-hmm. Is that fair? I mean, you might.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
What other parallel do you see between yourself and this man's journey? Because I see some parallels, and I was just curious how you see those parallels playing out here.
I want to hear yours first, since I can't think of one right now. So tell me, what are the parallels?
You have a belief in God's power, right? Mm-hmm. But as your journey went on, your healing didn't come as a result of a special prayer that was made at a certain time, and in the next moment you were healed.
Right.
You described the story of going in, at some point in time, the cancer had become metastatic. You were sent home to get your affairs in order. And then your doctor calls and says, hey, there's a new drug available. You say, okay, great. And you check it out and they start treating you. And then sometime later, you're in your doctor's office and they're like, the tumor's gone.
Yeah.
And your response was, wow, immunotherapy.
Right.
Your doctor's response was, immunotherapy, nothing. This is a miracle.
Right.
And it speaks to, very similar to this guy, you weren't actually looking for a miracle. Jesus walked by and he had a point for your life and a purpose to and it had to be showed to you. The same way it had to be showed to this man here. He was under a belief that it wasn't going to be healed, that it wasn't healable, because you see in this story, this is going to get highlighted in a little bit. In fact, if you want, I'll read that little segment there because I think it's a really a fascinating thing. So, because it says the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received the sight and asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" And then his parents answered, "We know that it is our son and that he was born blind, but how he now sees we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself." And so they feared the authorities of the day and agreed that, hey, they weren't going to be saying anything because they were going to get thrown out of the synagogue. So the second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know." And so this is, he's going to start speaking about what he believes. "One thing I do know, though, I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples?" So he's actually pretty witty. So, yeah. And they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." And so the man says something really, really profound now. What's next? The man answered, "Why? This is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If the man were not from God, he could do nothing." So this is a man
giving them a lesson
in faith and theology and understanding. So because he's also speaking his own belief. He's like, I was born blind, and I knew that in my entire life that there was no healing for somebody born blind, because in the history of the world, there's no story of that. So that was a family story that was carrying with him. And it did not matter that his family story was no one born blind. Jesus had the power to overcome that.
Yeah.
And so belief greater than his family story wasn't required.
Yeah. I think just to parallel a little bit of my story with this, and you started out, which I think is pivotal. It's key when Jesus said that this man's blindness is for the glory of God to be shown. Because this man, it's not like he had a great faith in Jesus that you could say, wow, this man's faith was part of this healing, played a role in this healing. But the only act of faith he did was to go wash the mud off of his eyes. And I think in the same way, similar to me, it was, yes, of course, I had a relationship with Jesus and walking with him, but I was engaged in an end-of-life process. I was processing grief and writing letters to my kids and getting ready to pass.
No one is healed from softball-sized tumors metastatically.
No, not at that point. It was unheard of, and that's why they later on labeled me an anomaly because it just didn't make any sense.
Now, let me just highlight something
yeah.
here. I don't not mean to cut you off, but I want to highlight something, and that is washing the mud was no different than you taking immunotherapy.
Right. Yeah, it was just a tool that was placed before me. And the interesting thing is, it was my only option.
Yeah.
It was a brand new immunotherapy drug for high-grade metastatic urothelial cancer with poor kidney function.
And washing the mud was this guy's only option.
Yeah, and yeah. So that was me. That was my only option. So it was easy to walk into it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the treatment was easy.
Yeah.
But it was easy to walk into it because it was my only option. But I did not think, I was not like claiming it and saying,
yeah,
I'm going to be healed from this. I was like, okay, Lord, this is what you placed before me. I'm going to do it, but I'm still going to prepare to go be with you. And that second time when he did the cystoscopy in his office and he yelled out, the tumor's gone, disappeared, I didn't know what to say. I was like, wow, immunotherapy, because I was like, I don't understand yet.
Wow, great mud here.
Yeah, wow, look at the mud.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I didn't understand fully what was happening, and because his occupation, I mean, he's one of the best surgeons in that field. His experience was that you don't survive this cancer. In fact, Memorial Sloan, my doctor, my surgeon there, who's one of the world's best, said send him home and call hospice. So these guys knew what was being faced, and yet I walked out of there with everyone shaking their heads, scratching their heads, and going, this is unbelievable.
So let's put it into context here. This guy basically said, this is the best mud ever. And the people around was like, mud nothing.
Yeah, mud nothing. Yeah. And so it's interesting because I think if I was questioned right after it, I might have said something like, although I have a relationship with Jesus and I know Jesus can heal, but I might have said something like, I don't know, I had this really big tumor and then now I don't.
Yeah.
There was this in fact, the drug wasn't even FDA approved yet. And it was like brand new science, a checkpoint inhibitor. What is that? It strips the protein coating around a cell. Like, I'm like, what, my surgeon read the manual or whatever on it, on the train, because it was just new to everyone. And even now the efficacy, it wasn't that great for a long time. Now they've added a targeted chemo type drug to it, which is proving to have a strong efficacy for metastatic urothelial high grade patients. But still, I mean, I've been, I lasted 1.5 years on that drug and then got a similar one, and now I had 7 years. Now I'm 8 years.
Yeah.
Out of the actual cancer showing up and so now so my doctors, I mean, when I go to my oncologist, she'll say something like, I have goosebumps, and I mean, I think I can't not but point to Jesus and say this is his hand completely.
So let's go back in time for a few seconds. Mm-hmm. That's what strikes me is that the opening passage of this, there was a line that they started out with this just really weird question, is like, who sinned, this man or his parents? So it starts as an accusation, and I don't want to get too focused. There's certainly inside of all kinds of disease culture, there's accusations and so forth, but Jesus makes it clear, no, that's not what's going on here. It's God's allowed this. God has a purpose for this man's life, and it's for glory that this has been allowed to happen. And so a different parallel I want to raise is you were given your own prophecy. Would you, and I'm calling it a prophecy, but it was a word from God about your life and what was going to happen to you. And so do you remember that? And
which one? There are a lot of things said, so.
Yeah, well, you had one that was related to how he was going to use your story, your life and story, and I would argue that, and I would argue that at that point in time, you felt like that God hadn't honored that promise.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's true.
You want to just give a little color to that now that you're.
I mean, it was the sense of, and the strong feeling that God was speaking to me in 2005 at Memorial Sloan Kettering, that he would use this journey, and that he wanted me to be transparent about it, and he was going to use it for some purpose.
Yeah.
And yet 10 years later, my 14th surgery, I was facing my demise.
Yeah.
And I've talked a lot about that surgery, so I don't have to go into it here. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think this is important to tie these points together for the reason of, it isn't your faith, like that you were like, I believe, and you eked out so much belief.
I proclaim.
Yeah, you proclaim. It's that Jesus saw you back then, and he had made a promise to you the same way he made impossible promises to Abraham and other great saints, where, hey, you're going to have a son over many nations, and his wife was already past childbearing years, as an example. And here you are, you're given a promise then, and you see at this point in time, it wasn't fulfilled, and it looked now impossible. And so why is this a miracle of such great proportions for your own life? Is that it was God actually fulfilling his word, not obeying your word. Right. It was God fulfilling his word.
Right.
And these are important things. And so you see in this story that God's fulfilling a purpose that he had ordained this person for before his birth. And that was an important part of this miracle, was to carry through on something that was this guy's life story playing out in the fullness. And you see he gets to stand in front of the religious leaders of the day and basically do a theological treatise on Jesus as the Messiah and why.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? Like you think about, he goes from a nobody, a blind nobody with no hope of healing because it's never happened before, to standing in front of the religious leaders and schooling them on who God is and why. And so I look at that and you just shake your head at the how big and the importance of why the miracle, why did this happen? And so some people might think, hey, just because I'm your friend, I'm puffing this up. I think it's important to be able to speak truth. Like we have to embrace what God has done. And the beauty of like where your journey is that you didn't sit quiet in your journey now. God told you, hey, I want you to be transparent.
Right.
And I want to use that journey for my glory. And on the backside of this, it's exploded. And it wasn't because you said, I'm going to go out and build fame for myself.
No.
You started getting calls and people reaching out. Would you come speak at this? Would you be a part of this? It was nothing that was done in your power.
I think you should write a book. I think
responding
you should do
in obedience. Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't asked to speak anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, just to reinforce it and to emphasize what Jesus had said. So in 2015, I didn't want to live. I mean, that's just clearly I stated. I was in such a hopeless place, distraught, depressed, and I did not want to live. And God was the one who picked me up out of the mire, out of the ashes. And he's the one that spoke in and told me to process my emotions and grieve well, grieve right, and then gave me scriptures and propped me up. So, and I've often wondered about that and even prayed about it. And I think it's the clear message I've gotten is that, Peter, in your story, and perhaps all of us, but in your story, you get no glory, I get all of it. And I think that's been my mantra, is that this has been God's story in me. This is his arm, this is his power, this is his working. And I think when Jesus said, this man's going to be healed because it's going to give God glory. That's the purpose behind that. Of course, his life was changed completely because of it, transformed, I'm sure, right? He probably became a follower of Christ after this, and my life has been
his story actually does
too
indicate that, yeah.
Yeah, and my life has been transformed too, but I can honestly say that, I mean, what's been impressed upon me is my powerlessness. And when Paul said, that's been one of my major scripture passages, is that when he was given the thorn in the flesh and prayed 3 times for it to be removed, it was painful. And God said, no 3 times. And he said, because when you are weak in yourself, then my strength can be completed, perfected, whatever word you want to use. And so I feel like that too for me. Like I have to get out of the way, and then God can do what he wants to do. Does that make sense?
It does. I want to spend some time on it though.
Yeah.
Because there's a couple of things that I want to balance here, and I've been having some conversations on this topic for the last few weeks. Actually, it's been interesting that you raise this now, and I hear something. So I want to make sure we define these terms really well, and just I'll complete the story of this guy here too. Is like Jesus said to him, "You have seen, and it is he who is speaking to you." So the man comes to him, and he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, basically.
So that came after when.
Yes. So he worshipped God, and I just raised that because this man's heart was, he didn't know who God was, and through this process, he got to the point where he worshipped God. And you're speaking of something about that is not your glory, and there's a concept here that I think is really important, and I think you and I talked about this briefly the other day, but there's a thing about becoming who God created you to be. And then there's also this thing about pride and humility, sin and obedience. And when I think about these categories, one of the things that I think it's in this story, he tells the guy, don't go, or maybe it's not this one here. I think I might be confusing it, but he heals someone in the same place, and he said, go and don't go on sinning. And the point I'm trying to get to is God is going to give you his glory. And so you are going to, and you are glorious in one sense, that God's created us for glory, but not self-earned, prideful glory. It's glory that is the reflection of him in us. But the one thing that I've been struggling with for a bit is I've been hearing this story is that I need to get out of the way. And I think what we really mean with that is like my sin nature needs to get out of the way. But the truth is that I don't need to get out of the way. In a sense, it's like God's created you, me, and everyone who listens to this podcast for a purpose. And in that sense, we need to step into our purpose. I mean, get to know God well enough, get to know ourselves enough to know God in us. Yeah. And so what I see isn't a man who stepped out of the way. It's a man who stepped into his purpose. And in that, it's glorious. Yeah. And it's not without glory, but it's not earned glory. You made it really clear that you didn't do any of this. Right. No. But you were obedient. You did step into, and now you see God in you, but you also see yourself, and you don't despise yourself. You see that you're a creation of God, created for glory. And it's not personal self-reflecting glory. It is, no, I actually want to honor the creator of that glory, the creator of that being. Because when we honor the creator of the being of ourselves, we learn to love ourselves. We learn to love God, because God created us, and he didn't create junk. He created valuable masterpiece. We are his masterpiece. But there's this can get really mixed up in a theological sense where I need to get out of the way, less of me, more of you. Yeah. And what we really mean, I think, and that's the reason I wanted to get the terms down, is like, you had to say less of my sin nature, less of my desire, my prideful side, my arrogant side, and more humility, more Christ-like characteristics to be the person that God's created me to be.
I think it's, Peter always cracks me up. And on the one hand, he gets a special revelation from God, Jesus said, because Jesus says, who do people say that I am? And finally, after a little bit of dialogue, Peter says, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus is like, "Wow, blessed are you, Simon, and your name's going to be Peter. I'm going to build my church on this rock." But he says, "Flesh and blood did not reveal this, but my Father in heaven." So God had given him this answer, and then a little while later, Jesus is like, "Well, I'm going to be delivered up to the chief priests and scribe, and I'm going to suffer and die and go through this whole period of agony, of death." And Peter's like, "May it never be, no way." And then Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan."
Yeah.
And it's interesting, for your interests are not set on my interest, but on your own interest or man's interest, right? Yeah. And I think that's what I'm saying. It's like, in my journey, it's not about my interests. It's about what God wants to do in me and through me, like all of us, right? Like that's the goal of people who claim Jesus as their Lord and Savior.
And I think can you imagine? Not only is this man written, is this man? Did he stand in front of the Pharisees of the day and the religious leaders, and he testified to the power of God and who God was. His name is written into the book of John for all of eternity. And there's a certain glory that's there, a honor that's given his suffering. And you said something earlier that I wanted to just put out there is, you talked about it as being your own journey, but I think this is on offer to not being written in the book of John, but this offer of deep connection with God as in our faith journey is on offer to all of us in one sense, in that to find the realness of what it is our suffering means is really what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But the stew doesn't look the same for everybody. And it's not based upon you did a better job of believing than the next guy, because what I love about your story is that you would argue you didn't have any idea. You were just like this guy here is going along with the belief that this can't be healed or this won't be healed. There's no examples of this. And now here you're an example and he's an example, so that Christ could be glorified.
I don't know where this man's heart was. Mine was, at the time, was just open, whatever, but I was planning on an end of life scenario.
Well, you do see an openness to God in his heart.
Yeah.
And I think you would say you were open to God also. But you weren't also demanding a miracle that no one had seen either.
Yeah, I think for me, part of my stew is that if a physical healing is to be accomplished, it's God's business. I can request it. I can, of course, pray for it. That's what it means. But it's up to God and up to him whether or not what he wants to do. And if he does do a healing, I've always felt like a physical healing, that he gets the glory from it,
Well, this is an interesting example, and I don't want it to, we're going to talk about a few more of these, and so they all look a little different. And
so a bunch more.
This one here is interesting because of the things that are missing in it. Right. And I know there are people who are like, you have not because you ask not. Yeah. And so it has to have an ask with it. And we don't see that in this story. And so it's an interesting thing, to really balance out.
Yeah. It is interesting.
There are components here that let's not make it too rigid. Let's not be too rigid just because we saw stew that our family had or healing that you had and say it has to be Peter's way or someone else's, that God's looking at this from a different lens than we are completely. And as we reflect on that, I loved the thing that you were saying. It's like, hey, you're aligning yourself to his story and his will. And as you align yourself to his story and his will, he does amazing things. And I think that might be the key component, because there was an ask to, will you obey? Will you align yourself to my story? And that's what I hear you saying just a few seconds ago. Hey, what was my heart to be aligned with God's heart?
Yeah.
And that's maybe the key ingredient we're talking about today.
Yeah. Yeah. Jesus is into the faith game, building faith.
Yeah. And that's, you see that in this journey. So,
Yeah.
and you see how he built a man's faith journey, and he worshiped him. So, well, it's a pretty cool story.
Yeah.
And hopefully there's some level of digestion that comes out of that. That is
Out of the faith stew.
Yeah, of the faith stew. Yeah.
Or the healing stew.
Yeah. Hopefully it provides some nourishment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone
Sean.
for listening.
Appreciate it.